Hello everyone and welcome back. 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. This is Jiwon and you're listening to Understanding Korea, one story at a time, where we talk about Korean history, culture, and the very specific ways they quietly shape our everyday lives. Today we are talking about one of the most ordinary Korean questions. 밥 먹었어? Did you eat? If you read this week's newsletter, you already know that I used this question as the doorway into a much larger conversation. Why eating together mattered so much in Korea, and why eating alone later became such a meaningful cultural shift. Today in the podcast, I want to stay with the question a little longer, because the more I think about it, the more I realize that "did you eat" is not just a phrase. It is almost a miniature theory of Korean care. It tells us something about how Koreans express love, about family, about hierarchy, about childhood. It even tells us something about work. And it tells us why the Korean table could feel so warm and so heavy at the same time. So today, we are not going deep into 혼밥 yet. We will do that next week. We are not going into 먹방 yet. That is coming later. And we are definitely saving Korean delivery culture for its own episode. Because once you open the door to Korean food delivery, suddenly, you are in a world where fried chicken can find you in a park, and that deserves its own time. Today is about the table before all of that, before 혼밥, before 먹방, before delivery apps. There was the Korean table, and the table was never just about food. Before we talk about Korean table, I want to pause for a second and think about eating itself. Because eating feels so ordinary to us that we sometimes forget how much meaning we attach to it. We gather around food, we celebrate with food, we comfort each other with food, we say, try this, and then quietly watch the person's face, waiting to see if they like it. Eating begins as a basic human need. We eat because we have to. But very quickly, food becomes something more. We feed babies. We cook for people we love. We bring soup to sick people. We bake for neighbors. We offer snacks to guests before they have even taken off their shoes. We remember people through what they cooked. We remember places through what we ate there. In other words, eating is never only eating. It is care, memory, culture, social order, sometimes control, sometimes love in its most edible form. And Korea is a particularly vivid example of this. Because in Korean, one of the most ordinary ways to ask whether someone is okay is simply 밥 먹었어? Did you eat? Here is the first thing to understand. Korean care is often practical before it is emotional. Of course, Koreans can say 사랑해, I love you. We do say it. We are not allergic to direct affection. Well, some of us may be mildly allergic, depending on family history and generational background. But in many Korean families, especially older ones, love does not always arrive as a direct emotional statement. It arrives as a fruit cup and placed in front of you. It arrives as a container of kimchi you did not ask for. It arrives as someone saying, eat this before it gets cold. It arrives as, take this home, while they put enough food in your bag to survive a small regional emergency. And very often it arrives as 밥 먹었어? Did you eat? The interesting thing is that this question does not require emotional fluency. You do not have to say, I'm worried about your psychological well being. You do not have to say, I'm afraid you are lonely, or I miss you, but I do not know how to say that without making both of us uncomfortable. You can just say, 밥은 먹고 다녀? Are you eating these days? And the other person understands. This is what I mean when I say Korean care often speaks through food. It does not mean Koreans are incapable of emotional language. It means food has long been one of the safest and most accepted ways to say what might otherwise be too tender to say directly. A parent may not say, I'm worried that you are overwhelmed and I do not know how to reach you. They say, 밥은 먹고 다녀? Are you at least eating? A friend may not say, your life seems to be falling apart and I want to be near you without intruding. They say, 뭐라도 먹어야지. You should eat something. A relative may not say, I do not know how to maintain emotional intimacy across time, distance, resentment, and family awkwardness. They say, 언제 밥 한번 먹자. Let's eat sometime. And sometimes that means an actual meal. And sometimes it means let's not disappear from each other's lives. That is a lot for rice to carry. But Korean bap has always carried more than calories. Let's stay with the word bap for a moment. In Korean, bap means rice. But in everyday use, it also means a meal. Breakfast is 아침밥, morning rice. Though often people just say 아침, meaning both morning and breakfast. Lunch is 점심, dinner is 저녁. But 밥 can cover almost all of it. You can ask, 밥 먹었어? Even if the person ate noodles, toast, soup, salad, or a convenience store triangle kimbap while standing under fluorescent lighting and reconsidering their life choices. The point is not rice as a literal grain. The point is meal as care. This is why the word sikgu is so important. Sikgu is often translated as family, but literally, it is made of two Chinese characters, sik, to eat, and gu, mouth, eating mouth. The people who eat together. There is another Korean word, 가족, which refers more directly to family through blood, marriage, and legal ties. But sikgu has a different feeling. It is more bodily, more domestic, more daily. Your sikgu are the people whose eating you know. You know who eats slowly, who always wants more soup, who takes the good kimchi first, who says they are not hungry and then eats half your food, who cannot handle spice but insists they can. A very dangerous person, by the way. A family is not only built through major life events, weddings, births, funerals, holidays. It is also built through ordinary repetition. Tuesday dinners, leftover soup, Saturday breakfast, someone eating the last piece of pajeon and pretending not to notice everyone saw. This is why a shared meal matters so much. It creates a kind of knowledge that is hard to get otherwise. You do not only know what people say about themselves, you know how they behave when they are hungry, which is, frankly, a more accurate personality test. Now let's talk about 밥상머리 교육. Literally, this means education at the head of the dining table. It is a phrase many Koreans recognize immediately. It refers to what children are supposed to learn at the family table. Manners, respect, conversation, patience, hierarchy, gratitude, and the ability to read the room. In the newsletter, I joked that the table becomes a classroom without desks, grades, or the ability to raise your hand and say, "May I be excused from intergenerational hierarchy today?" The joke works because the idea is real. At the table, a child learns, do I begin eating before my grandparents begin? How do I receive food from an elder? When do I say thank you? How much do I take? Do I grab the last piece? Do I notice if someone else has not eaten? Do I help clear the table? Do I complain about the food? And if I do complain, how quickly do I learn that this was a tactical error? This is not just Korean, of course. Researchers in many countries have studied family meals and children's development. Family meals have been associated with nutrition, emotional connection, language development, and academic or mental health outcomes, though we have to be careful not to treat dinner as magic. A happy, calm family meal and a tense, critical family meal are not the same thing. A family dinner is not automatically good because people are physically in the same room. Sometimes a quiet meal alone is healthier than a meal where everyone is being judged. But in Korea, the aspiration was powerful. The shared meal was worth protecting because it was where children learned how to become social beings. And one of the most important things children learned was nunchi. Nunchi is hard to translate, but social radar gets close. It is the ability to sense what is happening in a room without everything being said directly. At a Korean table, nunchi is everywhere. Is the oldest person eating? Is someone waiting for water? Is there enough meat left? Did someone quietly avoid the anchovies? Is the atmosphere tense? Did your uncle just say something that means the conversation should now turn gently, like a bus avoiding a pothole? Nunchi is not simply politeness. It is a social perception. And the Korean table has historically been one of the places where people trained it. Now this can be beautiful. It can produce attentiveness. Someone notices you are eating less than usual. Someone puts the good piece of fish on your rice. Someone saves you the last sweet potato. Someone remembers that you like the crunchy edge of the pancake. That is love in a very specific and edible form. But it can also be exhausting. Because if everyone is noticing, you are also being noticed. This is where Korean meals get complicated. The same table that feeds you can also monitor you. The same person who says, "Eat, you must be hungry," may also say, "Why are you eating so much?" The same person who saves you the best piece may also comment on your body. "왜 이렇게 안 먹어?" "Why are you eating so little?" "살쪘네." "You gained weight." "이것도 먹어봐." "Try this too." The last one is often love, but it is a very active love. A love with chopsticks, a love with strategy, a love that has already decided your plate has room for 3 more things. And again, this is not only family. The table is where hierarchy can be performed. Who sits where? Who serves whom? Who pours? Who receives? Who speaks freely? Who laughs politely? Who waits? This is why I think the Korean table is so useful for understanding Korean culture more broadly. It is intimate, but it is also structured, warm, but rarely neutral. It contains both care and obligation. And that brings us to work. Let's talk about 회식. If you have worked in Korea, studied Korean corporate culture, or watched enough Korean dramas, you have probably encountered it. 회식 is the workplace dinner. Traditionally, it was framed as a team bonding event, a way for co-workers to become closer outside the formal office structure. In theory, it is dinner. In practice, historically, it could be a performance of loyalty, hierarchy, alcohol tolerance, emotional endurance, and karaoke survival. The menu might be chosen by the most senior person. The seating might follow rank. The toasting order could matter. The first round might lead to a second round, and the second round might lead to a third round. And by the third round, everyone has learned things about their manager that perhaps no one needed to know. Attendance was theoretically optional. Declining was theoretically fine. Everyone understood that both of those things could be somewhat theoretical. And the thing about 회식, the reason it's worth talking about in this context, is that it shows how the grammar of the Korean family table traveled straight into the Korean workplace. The same dynamics, hierarchy performed through food, belonging demonstrated through eating together, obligation disguised as warmth. Now, and this is important, 회식 culture is not frozen in the 1990s. This has genuinely changed, especially among younger Korean workers. After the pandemic, many companies shifted to shorter, earlier gatherings. There is a growing social norm, especially among younger Koreans, that you don't have to drink to be a team player. Some workplaces now do lunch 회식 instead of late night dinners. The term 작은 회식, a small modest 회식, has started appearing in workplace conversations which would have sounded like pure nonsense a generation ago. But understanding the old 회식 culture matters because it tells us something important. In Korea, even outside the family, the shared meal was never neutral. It carried social weight. It was always doing more than feeding people. There is another piece from the book 먹방 말고 인증샷 말고 식사. Eating, not 먹방, not food pictures, that I want to bring into the podcast because I did not have room to fully explore it in the newsletter. The book talks about a Korean variety show called Three Meals a Day, 삼시세끼. The premise sounds almost aggressively uneventful. People go somewhere, often rural or quiet, and they cook and eat 3 meals. That is it. They find ingredients, they prepare food, they cook, they eat, they clean. Then somehow it is time to think about the next meal. From a high concept entertainment perspective, this sounds almost like a threat. Tonight on television, people successfully feed themselves. And yet, many viewers found it deeply comforting. Why? Because in modern Korean life, 3 unhurried meals can feel like a fantasy. Not luxury in the gold-plated sense. Not luxury like a private island. Luxury like time. Luxury like a pot of rice. Luxury like people being in the same place long enough for soup to happen. The book describes a modern rhythm that feels painfully familiar. Breakfast skipped, lunch eaten as quickly as possible, dinners grabbed together, students rush through crowded cafeterias. Parents' work schedules do not fit around family dinners. Families still live together, but they cannot reliably find 1 hour in common. That line hits hard because it shows that the loss of the shared table is not always dramatic. It does not announce itself. It happens through schedules, school, work, night shifts, commutes, screens, fatigue. No one decides, today we will stop being sikgu. It just becomes harder to eat together, and then harder again. And then one day, the family is still there, but the shared rhythm is gone. I also want to briefly mention breakfast here because it gives us one more clue about how deeply food and care are connected in Korea. In Korean, 아침 means morning, but it also means breakfast. You can say 아침 먹었어? Did you eat breakfast? But literally, the word 아침 carries both the time of day and the meal. Morning is not only something that happens, it is something you're supposed to eat. That is culturally interesting. A paper on the meaning and importance of breakfast in Korean dietary life notes that in traditional life, breakfast carried more weight than lunch, though modern patterns have changed sharply. It also notes that in 2008, 4 out of 5 Koreans still ate breakfast, and more than 90% of adults who ate breakfast had rice as their staple. But breakfast skipping had already become much more common among young people, especially those in their teens and 20s. The same paper is careful about health claims. It notes that many studies linking breakfast to obesity, chronic disease, or cognitive performance are based on observational data, and the evidence is not always simple or consistent. That kind of caution matters. Breakfast is not a magic button. You cannot just hand someone rice at 7 a.m. and solve modern life. But culturally, breakfast tells us something. The idea that you should begin the day fed, especially as a child or student, is powerful in Korea. And when someone fails to eat breakfast, it can be read not only as a personal choice, but as a sign that life has become too rushed, too lonely, too demanding, or too fragmented. So again, food becomes a diagnostic tool. Not just did you eat, but what kind of life makes eating possible, and what kind of life makes it impossible. This brings me to one of my favorite distinctions in food writing. A classic French food writer, Bria Savarin, made a useful distinction between the pleasure of eating and the pleasure of the table. The pleasure of eating is personal. Taste, texture, heat, crunch, the satisfaction of hunger, that first bite of something hot when you did not realize how cold and tired you were. You can have the pleasure of eating alone, standing in your kitchen, in your car, at your desk, in front of the sink, which is not glamorous but often very practical. But the pleasure of the table is different. The pleasure of the table requires other people. It is the conversation, the mood, the timing, the small negotiations, the person who slides a dish toward you before you ask, the shared laugh when everyone reaches for the last piece at once, the little ritual of someone saying, "Eat, eat," even when you are already eating. For Bria Savarin, the pleasure of the table begins with eating, but it is completed through conversation and human presence. That distinction is extremely useful for understanding Korean food culture, because when Koreans talk about food, we are often talking about more than taste. We are talking about the situation around the taste. Who was there? Who cooked? Who paid? Who invited whom? Who was missing? Who said something that ruined the mood? Who made everyone laugh? Who packed leftovers? This is why some foods taste better in memory than they ever did in reality. The tteokbokki outside the school may not have been objectively fancy. It may have been served in a paper cup with a toothpick, but it tasted like freedom after school. It tasted like friends. It tasted like standing around with nowhere urgent to be for maybe 8 minutes, which, for a child, is almost a paradise. That is the pleasure of the table. Sometimes the table is not even a table. Sometimes it is a convenience store bench. Sometimes it is a low plastic stool. Sometimes it is a group of children standing outside a small shop, eating something spicy and red, pretending they are not burning their mouth. The table is wherever the meal becomes relational. Now we should also be careful not to romanticize the Korean table as if it has always existed in one perfect traditional form. It has not. The Joseon dynasty lasted from 1392 to 1910, and during much of that history, meals could be deeply hierarchical. Man and woman might eat separately. Elders might eat first. Formal meals could be served as doksang, individual trays. The warm image of everyone gathered around one table is real, but it is also historical. It became more common through social change, urban housing, and the rise of the modern nuclear family. So when we say the Korean table, we are not talking about one timeless object. We are talking about a changing social arrangement. But across those changes, eating remained a powerful way to reveal relationships. Who eats first? Who eats with whom? Who eats alone? Who is served? Who serves? Who is watched? Who is allowed to relax? The table was not only furniture, it was social structure. And because it was a social structure, stepping away from it would later matter. So let's come back to where we began. 밥 먹었어? Did you eat? This is such a simple question, but inside it, we can hear a whole culture of care. We can hear the older parent who cannot say, "I miss you," but can ask if you ate. We can hear the friend who does not know how to help, but offers food. We can hear the family that becomes sikgu through ordinary meals. We can hear the child learning nunchi at the table. We can hear the workplace dinner where food becomes loyalty. We can hear the beauty of being noticed and the exhaustion of being watched. This is why next week's topic, 혼밥, matters. Eating alone did not emerge in a society where meals were already private and individual. It emerged in a society where meals were full of other people, full of care, obligation, hierarchy, warmth, and memory. For some people, eating alone would feel sad. For others, it would feel like relief. For many, it would be both. But before we can understand why one person sitting alone with a meal could become a cultural symbol, we have to understand the table they stepped away from. That table was not just a surface for food. It was a relationship, and sometimes an entire social order. Next week, we will talk about the rise of 혼밥, what it means to eat alone in a country where eating alone was once socially uncomfortable, why people began to claim it as freedom, and how Korean society started building spaces, products, and even screen companions for the person eating alone. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this helped you understand why the Korean table was never just about food, and why eating alone became such a meaningful cultural shift. And if you'd like to look more closely at the Korean words and phrases I used in today's episode, check the episode notes. I've included the Korean, romanization, and English meaning there. Take care and see you next week. 오늘도 들어주셔서 감사합니다. 다음 주에 만나요. Bye!